I love dragons and death, 'cause they are fun. Hey, it's Tory Torrential, and tonight I tried a few different things in a few different segments, and there was a little bit of redundancy, and there's some extra stuff, but we ended up landing at over almost an hour long. It's about easily twice as long as I necessarily want to be, so don't think this is the new normal. It's just growing pains, me trying things, trying to get as much info out and keep it entertaining, and sometimes it doesn't work. I put in so much work, and I've been watching it, trying to figure out how to edit it down, and there's just not a good way to do it. So this is just going to be a long one, but I will try to condense it going forward. All right. So we're on chapter 19, John, and he has joined the Black Watch. I know I should be wearing a black shirt, but sorry. First off, we're actually hitting double digits now. We got 20 people watching, which means I'm going to do my best to try to edit a little bit. I'm still just on my phone, so I haven't been able to monetize anything on any of these. So you get what you get. I'm trying my best. Anyway, before we get into anything, corrections and omissions. So from the last video, which was Catelyn, that's the first correction, I was informed it's not Caitlyn, it's Catelyn. So that's my bad. From here on out, it's Catelyn Stark. Also, I completely glossed over how Littlefinger got his name, which was revealed. He was down in River Run. It was Catelyn's brother who started referring to him as Littlefinger because his family's modest holdings were on the smallest of the 5 fingers, and he himself was a very slight man, and kind of just a little tricky kid, so Littlefinger was the nickname, and it stuck pretty much for good because he's still smaller than Catelyn. Kind of wiry. Also, I called the spider, the eunuch, Viserys, almost the entire time last video, and his name is Varys. He is Lord Varys, even though the title is afforded to him because of his council spot. He doesn't have any holdings, but he does have a title of Lord. Okay, now I'm going to hand this off to Professor Tory because there are more info dumps we have to get through. Oh yes, thank you. I am Professor Tory, esteemed professor of world building and lore, actually. And today, there was a lot of info about the Wall and the Watch. So we're going to discuss this a little bit. The Wall happens to be the largest man-made structure in the entire world. It stands about 700 feet tall, which is about 3 times taller than any tower that's constructed currently. Now, along this wall, they built many strongholds. There's 19 separate strongholds for the Watch, which we'll get into that in a minute. But the notable ones are the East Watch by the sea. Then on the other side, you have, I believe it's the Shadow Tower, where the wall connects into the mountain to help form the barrier in the north. And at the end of King's Road, when you go as north as you can, it ends at Castle Black, which is kind of in the center of the wall. Now, it's important to note that the Night's Watch historically had about 5,000 members. and they have significantly diminished in power. So there's only about 500. So the other 16 strongholds along the wall are kind of ghost forts. There's nobody in them. There's just wind whistling through. And the manned ones are the ends and the middle, because there's about 500 people. It's also important to note that a lot of the strongholds and places, even in Castle Black, are in states of disrepair. You know, their numbers have dwindled. Their force is going down a bit. The Night's Watch is run by a Castle Black, which did have 5,000 people. Now it has about 500. I'm not sure about the other strongholds. So that's not the total Night's Watch. That's just the castle. But it is home to the Lord Commander of the Watch, who is Jor Mormont, a bald, big bearded, immense man. Now, we also know that Cotter Pike, who was born as a tavern witch's bastard, actually rose through the Watch to become the commander of the East Watch by the sea. They haven't mentioned anyone who works at the Shadow Tower currently. In Castle Black, though, the Master at Arms is Alistair Thorne, who's a skinny, kind of severe man who is not very nice to all the new recruits, probably because he's been through it for a long time. He's about 50. And then on top of that, there's a mention of a Bowen Warsh, who's just a high officer. We're not entirely sure where he fits in. There's an armorer, Donald Noy, that's going to come up, who used to be the armorer for Stannis Baratheon, and it's rumored or confirmed, one or the other, but they say he's the one who made the King Bobby's giant warhammer, and he only signed on to the Watch because he took an axe wound to his arm, which went septic, and he lost his arm. So he's a one-armed armorer. Irony. Anyway, maybe he should arm himself, right? So, on top of that, the other notable one that got mentioned that's an officer is the first ranger is actually Uncle Benjen. Like, he's the first ranger, not just a ranger. So that seems to be the top out. There's also the recruiting class, which I'll go ahead and do that as Professor Tory. Rob is currently in a squad of about 20 new recruits that they're trying to train up. And this is told through the view of John, but his assessment of some of the more notable recruits and stuff, because almost all of them are older than John by like a year or two, so they're like 16, 17-year-olds. So if there's a guy, Gren, who's big but clumsy. There is one kid named Totter, who they call Toad because he has a low raspy voice. So Toad's around. There's one guy named Darian, who he's really quick with the sword, but he's also terrified of being hit by a sword. There's one poor guy named Jaren, who is only categorized as being as weak as a girl. There is Pip, right, who uses his sword like a dagger. He doesn't know how swords work yet. And there's one other notable one that they mention is Halder. And Halder apparently he hits brutally hard, but he just runs straight into attacks. So that is the future of the Night's Watch. Now, with these things said and the corrections and omissions done, I'm going to hand this back over to my compatriot, currently cosplaying as emo kid Jon Snow, and he will bring you back up to speed with the recap and then enjoy the plot of this chapter. Okay, without further delay, in case I didn't call it out, this is Tory Survives Game of Thrones. We're on chapter 19, Jon. I keep getting the numbers wrong, so I will just type what Jon it is. I believe it's 3. I might be wrong. Anyhow, Jon, just to bring you up to speed, joined the Night's Watch. At current, he's in it, but he was traveling up to Castle Black in the north. Last we saw him, he had a little bit of an altercation / bonding moment with Tyrion. It was kind of a political advantage situation of him getting out of there, because for some reason Ned was dead set on him not going to King's Landing, saying he'd be picked on. Catelyn hates him and did not want him around, so him deciding to take the Black to find a place to belong was his choice, because he liked his Uncle Benjen, he liked everything, and he figured I'll go hang out with my Uncle Ben, and I'll join the Night's Watch and, you know, take my noble sacrifice and whatnot. Now, coming up to this, I'm gonna do this kind of chronologically. What happens for poor Jon Snow is that he gets there, and as soon as they arrive, Tyrion, you know, who doesn't owe him anything, is spending all of his time riding up on the walls and playing dice with the higher officers, so he's just poof, you know, basically amusing himself. On top of that, his Uncle Benjen switches into an entirely other person, because now he's back at work as the first ranger. So he's cold, like immediately he gets shifted over to Alistair Thorne, the Master at Arms, to get trained up. Alistair Thorne immediately mocks him and brands him as Lord Snow, which really bothers him. And apparently Alistair is just not a nice man. He's really harsh almost all the time. And leading up to where the scene actually starts, he had talked with his Uncle Ben. He said, I want to go on ranges with you and stuff. His Uncle Ben's like, you're too young, you're too green, you still smell of summer, you can go on ranges with me. When Alistair says you're a man of the Night's Watch and not before. And he tries to argue with his uncle, and he's like, I'm gonna be 15 in like 2 weeks and stuff. I'm almost a man grown. I can handle this. And his uncle cuts him off at the knees again. He's like, your name and where you're from is not gonna get you any favors here. People in the Watch only get what they deserve, right? So, like, his uncle's not even checking on him. He's hanging out with his bosses and whatnot. And Jon goes the next step and wakes up at dawn when they're leaving for the ranging and stuff. And there's, like, some fat guy singing to himself, like, saddling a horse. And Ben's, like, laughing at that. As soon as he sees Jon, he's like, it's not happening. You know, like, I don't know how many times I got to tell you this. We can talk about this when I get back, you know, but you need to knock it off, basically. So Jon, just the state of Jon right now is he feels incredibly like kind of betrayed. He feels like, why would my dad let me take this sacrifice? You know, he feels like his Uncle Benjamin just flipped up on him. And it's important to note, John at that time was so angry, he was thinking about what Tyrion was talking about, and he pictures his Uncle Ben dead, like bleeding in the snow. And at current, it's been about 3 weeks, so Uncle Ben is about a week late coming back, and John is worried that he might have cursed him and caused his death. You know, like, just not based on anything. He's like, I hope I didn't kill him, you know, wishing he was dead. And one other kind of fun detail that they slip in there, and I'm not sure if it's in the dialogue or the exposition, so I'll just say it, is the mission that Uncle Ben is on is actually to go find Waymar Royce, which, if you remember from chapter 1, is the name of the commander. And we know what happened to him. Like, the White Walker zombie guys with the magic blades sliced them to ribbons. So that's a pause for concern on his thing. So he starts feeling super bad. It turns out John, he does say this in dialogue, I'll skip over it later, but John has been living in, I believe it's called Hardin's Tower, and it's this busted, like the ramparts are broken and stuff, tower that is like leaning and stuff, and he's the only person sleeping there. Nobody cares where he sleeps, apparently, and most people are scared of Ghost, so it's just him and Ghost there. He ties him up in the stables while he's practicing, and then he retreats to his room. After that, you know, he felt so bad, he just kind of buried his face in Ghost. And like, he didn't even want to pray because he's like, the gods are cruel. Like, we're talking full super emo John at this point. Like, he's like, God hates me, my family hates me, I have no friends, because he despises the kids he got recruited, you know, along with and stuff. Like, his only real happy moments are when he's thinking of his old family, which he does fondly recall, like, all of them. Like, he's, you know, he goes through, like, I miss, you know, being buddies and rivals with Rob. I miss, you know, little Ricky trying to con sweets and stuff. I you know, I even miss the girls. Like, like, you know, he's like, I even miss Sansa, even though she called me her half-brother constantly. And then he gets to Arya, and he's got such a longing for his little partner in crime. I got your picture, I'm coming with you, dear. Arya, count me in. There's a story at the bottom of this wolf I'm cuddling. So, yeah, he's basically just staying completely isolated and hating life and everything around him. He's just, you know, and he, you know, with the guilt of his uncle still not being back, he's like alone. Everybody's mean, everybody sucks, whatever. So we cut in on him whooping the crap out of Gren, the, you know, big clumsy dude. Like, they're, you know, using the blunted swords and stuff, but it's decisive. Like, you know, he presses the attack, he gets a hamstring on him, you know, Gren goes for a high strike, he sidesteps it, hits him in the head, And then when Gren tries to swing again, he forearms him near the ground. He's on the ground, sitting there with his sword, and he hits him right in the wrist and disarms him. And Gren's just like, the bastard just broke my wrist, you know? And Alistair's like, that's enough, you know? And he's like, he also hamstrung you, caved your skull in, and a lot of stuff. He calls him an aurochs, you know, like, I'm guessing that's a big cow or whatever. And he tells, I guess Totter and Jaren are there as well. And he tells, you know, Totter and Jaren, like, get him on his feet, whatever. And John, this is like the one time John feels good about himself, is like when he's winning the duels and stuff. So he's sitting there and he like rests on his sword for a second, and he's just like taking a moment, you know, like, at least I'm a badass on the sword, because I guess he really is better than Rob, you know, at the sword. So he's kind of taking a moment, and Alistair's messing with him. He calls him Lord Snow again, and he's like, oh, are you tired, Lord Snow? That's not a cane, you know. And John's like, I'm fine, you know. And he's like, tell me true, you know, pretty much. And he's like, my legs hurt, my arm's sore. And like, you know, he's kind of feeling the hits now that the fight's over, so like he can feel his bruises starting. And he's like, you're weak, man. And he's like, I won. And he's like, you didn't win, Gren lost, you know. And he kind of walks in, and he's so he's like hanging his stuff up, you know, getting out of his armor, because they're all wearing like boiled leather and chain and stuff, and normally they just wear like kind of rough spun, you know, wool, I'm guessing. That's also black, but, you know, so he's switching out, and he's chilly, and he just doesn't like life. And sure enough, in the armory, like where he is putting his stuff up, here comes Gren and Totter and Jaren and the two kids from before that were R-worders and stuff. And he's like, you broke my wrist, you know. And John's like, I'll break the other one and say the word, you know, because they're all bigger than him, like a head taller and stuff. And he's like, maybe I should break you, you know. And he's like, you could try. And he goes for his sword, but when he tries to go for his sword, I believe it's Totter, because Jaren's pretty weak, you know, like they say he's as weak as a girl or whatever. He twists his arm behind his back and like puts it up, and it, you know, he's basically calling them bitches. And they're like, oh, you got a mouth on you, huh? And he's like, I bet you got that from your whore mom, huh? What was her name? I probably had her, right? And that was the wrong thing for anyone to say to John. Was that like, your mama's a hoe or whatever? Because he's like, my mama's a what? And he straight stomps on like a Totter's foot, like eels out of it, and just pounces. And like he has him by the head. He's like, bam, up against the stone floor. And like right then you hear this kind of big boomy voice, like fighting's for the yard. You bring fighting in here, then it's gonna be my fight, and you won't like that, you know. And he's like walking, and it's this one-armed dude who's, you know, Donald Noy or whatever, who lost his arm. The armorer is actually in there, and he's like, you know. And instantly Gren's like he broke my wrist, and like Toad is like, he tried to kill me, you know. And like he barely looks at Gren's wrist, and he's like, it's like a sprain, probably go talk to the maester or whatever. And then he's like, his head needs looking at though, because there's blood coming out of the back of his head. And he's like, everybody get out of here, go back to your cells, except you, John. And he kind of zeroes in on John. And that's like when they're talking, he's like, look, I don't know how to tell you this, but you're an emo kid and they're goth. If you keep this up, they will stab you in your sleep, you know? And he's like, it's not my fault that they suck. You know what I mean? Like, pretty much. And he's sitting there and he's like, you know, they're crappy. Like, they came at me. Cause he's like, look, dude, you're all acting high and mighty like you're a lord and stuff. And he's like, he called my mama a hoe. And he's like, you know, you could be a hoe. Your mama could be a hoe. We don't know. Like, Ned Stark did make a bastard, and like in his head he's been like dreaming that his mom was like this noble woman, and he could almost see her face and highborn and everything. And he's like Ned Stark is a man of honor. He wouldn't lay with a whore, you know. And he's like, Ned Stark's honor didn't stop him from making no bastard though, you know. But like, on top of that, he's like, also, you know, most of these dudes are the bastards of whores and stuff like that. Like, you know, Jaren, he was actually like a Septums get. And then on top of that, Cotter Pike, our own commander of the Eastwatch, he was a Tavern Wench's bastard. So maybe ease up on that a little bit. Because what you need to realize is you are a bastard. You're not a little lordling. Like, you can't walk around like you were, you know, like all highborn and stuff. Like, being highborn and a bastard, it's not that hard. Like, most of these guys are different. Like, you're a bully. And he's like, fuck you, I'm a bully. Like, they attacked me. How does that make me a bully? And he's like, you humiliated every one of those guys. You know, every time you go out there, you're not training, okay? You're just beating the hell out of them. And he's like, well, they're bigger than me and they're older than me. And he's like, yeah, and I'm sure that your master at arms taught you how to fight someone bigger, didn't they? And he's like, ooh, you know, because he's like, and he's like, what if I told you 1 in 20 of those kids might have been able to afford a sword? None of them learned anything. They might have like fought with sticks outside like a brothel, or, you know, somewhere along the King's Road or on a ship somewhere like one time, but none of them have any training. And then you're coming through just smashing people, freaking getting, you know, making them look bad. They're literally going to kill you in your sleep over this. You know, and then John kind of has to like check his privilege for a second, because he did, you know, get trained, because he even was like thinking to himself, he's like, man, Rob's 14 and he could take every one of these kids, you know? And that's why, because Sir Roderick was sitting there teaching him how to sword fight. And then it kind of dawns on him that like he hasn't been winning all these matches. He's just been beating the crap out of them because he's trained and they aren't yet, you know. And it like really sours the victory. And he calls him Lord Snow again, like to mess with him. But he's like, don't call me that. But like, most of his steam's out of his engine, because he's realizing like okay, I've been being a bully. Like, I really feel like he feels it, because then he like walks out. You know, he's like, he just doesn't have a lot to say. Because, you know, on top of that, Donald's like, look, you swore the oath just like we all did. You're stuck here with us for life. Is that really like how you want your brothers to see you? You know, like, do you just want to end up dead on a range sometime? Because, you know, everybody's basically equal once you swear in the watch. So he walks out and he's kind of like ho-humming, you know, and he's thinking about the wall and going through like some of the stuff Professor Tory covered, and just the actual presence of the wall, because it's so big he like forgets it's there sometimes, because, you know, it's just 700 feet. It's a giant, like, it's almost too big for him to comprehend unless he's paying attention to it. And it says like every once in a while he just gets a sense of it, like, oh. And then like he's like, this thing has been here since before the Seven Kingdoms. And he has this weird feeling like if the wall falls, the world falls with it. Which, I don't know, that is just like a cool phrase that was thrown in there. But while he's sitting there, Tyrion, the imp, comes up on him. He's just like, what's up? And he's like, oh, didn't see you coming. And he's like, sorry, I like taking people unawares. Sometimes you learn things, And Jon's like, yeah, good luck learning anything from me. And he's like, I find I learn things everywhere I go, And they're kind of just talking in general. And he brings up, like, his Uncle Ben missing, And Jon feels really guilty still about, like, picturing him dead and all that. So, like, he turns away from Tyrion for a second because he doesn't want Tyrion to see any guilt in his eyes or anything, because Jon's already clocked that Tyrion picks stuff up, like, super quick. So he, like, turns away, and then they're talking about them, disappearing, and, like, how he'd want to be out there and stuff. And in truth, he really does. He wants to go ranging with his uncle so bad. He wants to, like, fight Mance Rider and all his wildlings and go into the haunted forest and whatever. Because right now, he's just stuck in this Castle Black, like, isolated and hating stuff. But then he's talking, and Tyrion also mentions, kind of just as a side note, that a lot of patrols have been disappearing. So I think whatever happened in chapter 1 in the north might be, like, scaling up, and so, like, there's bad stuff. I'm kind of worried for Uncle Ben right now, because he was looking for Waymar Royce, so they might be going the same way even, but he's kind of, and then they're talking about his living situation and how he picked the tower away from them and stuff. And the imp's like, yeah, I'm sorry, Lord Snow. And he's like, don't call me Lord Snow. And he's like, would you prefer the imp? And he kind of doubles down on the advice he gave him before. He's like, look, if they try to give you a name, take that name, make it your own, ruin it. Like, if you show that their words will cut you, you'll never get away from the mockery. Like, you gotta own it and make it your own. Be Lord Snow. And then, they're talking, and he's like, where's your wolf? And he's like, oh, he's in the stable when I'm training, and the rest of the time I'm with him. And he's like, oh, where are you at? And he's like, I'm over in Hardin's Tower. And he's like, that thing's about to fall over, like, I gotta tell your dad to arrest some stonemasons so your tower doesn't collapse on you and stuff. And yeah, it turns out, like, he just stays with Ghost and in his own little thing. And he's like, yeah, they don't care where I sleep or anything, so everybody's scared of Ghost. It's just me and him over there. Well, then Tyrion's like, kind of like, all right, but I need food though, and they're about to serve some vile stew up in there, and I think we should get a bowl. Because it's super cold. Like Tyrion's walking around. He's got so many leathers on. It describes him as looking like a small bear. Like, he's like walking teddy bear. And then, they get in, and he sees the boys over by the fire, and they're, like, talking and stuff, like Gren and, Totter and Jaren and all. And they're, like, cussing at each other and, like, just being whatever. Because, see, Jon said, they're kind of brutish and they're, like, bullyish and stuff. So they just picture a bunch of jocks. They're like, no, yeah, but, like, going back and forth. And Jon kind of thinks twice. And he's like, all right, I'm going to eat over here, and just avoid them. So he gets his, like, little black bread and this bowl of what's supposed to be mutton stew. And Tyrion, I guess he's like a good cook, or he has a good palate, because he, like, smells it, and he's like, barley, onion, carrots. Someone needs to tell him turnip isn't meat, And Jon's like, it's mutton stew, man. And, like, Jon is like, as soon as he smells it, his mouth starts watering. He's like, oh. But then there's Alistair, like, Alistair comes up, Thorne, and he's like, Lord Commander wants to see you. And Jon's like, oh no, my uncle, right? And, Tyrion, who's just been talking about it. And so I guess he did pick up a little bit that he was worried and stuff. And he's like, is it my uncle? Is he okay? And Alistair's just ignoring him. He's like, the Lord Commander's not actually used to waiting. And I'm not used to answering questions from bastards. Because Alistair does not give a fuck, apparently. And Tyrion's like, stop messing with him, dude. You're scaring him. And Alistair actually pushes back at the imp, and he's like, why don't you mind your business? You're not in the watch, right? and freaking the imp is just like, oh, apparently we choose violently. Like, I thought we were being gentlemen. Now let's get gangster. And he jumps down and he's like, yeah, but you know what I am on? The court. And you know what I could do? Is I could whisper one thing into one ear, and then you're never training a kid again. And that kind of shakes Alistair to the point where he's like, it's not about Benjen. It's another matter entirely. And John's like, what matter? And he's like, you got a letter from your brother. And he's like, sorry, your half brother. I don't know. And John is just like, oh God, something happened to Bran, and Tyrion standing next to him, which is another reason why because he's like, I'm so sorry, John, and like he's instantly trying to be comforting, and John just starts running a little bit, like he's power walking and stuff, and it says like he's going up the stairs, and as soon as he gets past like the guards and everything, he's like 2 steps at a time running up the stairs, and he flies in there, and there's Jorah Mormont, standing there, and he's got a little raven on his thing, he's bald, he's got the bushy beard and everything. And he's like, what happened to Bran? What happened to Bran? Because he doesn't care anymore. He wants to know what happened to Bran. He's been like super worried about it. And on top of that, Jorah Mormont, he's just like, oh, I'm told you could read, so he goes, and there's like the little cracked seal that's the white dire wolf. So he knows it's from Robb, which, can we just give Robb big ups, for sending John the letter? You know what I mean? Because that was a choice. He didn't have to do that. So he obviously still feels John as his brother. He's like, I got to tell John what's going on. Even though he knows John's like stuck up at the watch and all that. And he's like crying, trying to read it basically, and can't get it out. But that's when he more or less figures out that Bran has woken up. And, he's like, Bran's awake! And Jorah Mormont's like, but crippled, and he's like, I'm sorry. And he's like, that doesn't matter. My brother's gonna live. Like, Bran's gonna live. And he's running down the stairs. And this is why I called it. Like, John just cares. Because, like, he loses all composure. He picks up Tyrion and he spins in a circle. And he's like, Bran's gonna live, And, like, Tyrion's like, what the heck is going on? And he, like, hands the letter directly to Tyrion. And he's like, hey, read it, And then he turns, because everybody's, like, seeing him kind of being happy and manic for the first time. And they're like, I didn't know emo kids could do that. And they're like, because they're all goth, like they just hate life. And Gren's standing there, and he's all kind of bandaged up and stuff. He's got it like his bum limb, and he starts walking, and John starts walking towards him, and he's like, hey, stay away, bastard, because like he doesn't want that smoke after what he just saw him do to Toad. And he's like, hey, look, I'm sorry, man. Robb did that to me with a wood sword one time, and it hurt like hell. So I can only imagine how bad your wrist hurts. And I just wanted to say sorry. If you got some time,
I could show you how to defend against it when you get a little better. And that's when Alistair, you know, he like chimes back up, and he's like, oh, you're trying to take over my job, right? And he's like, I bet you I could teach him, you know, because Alistair's basically saying, you know, it's hopeless anyway. You'll never teach him sword fighting. I have a better chance teaching your wolf to juggle. And John was actually like, I'll take that bet. I would love to see Ghost juggle, you know. And then Tyrion, you know, starts chuckling. He's like, you know. And when he does that, like some of the other Night's Watch, you know, they're like, and then everybody's like, even Gren chuckles a little bit. And then Alistair, just cold as ice, is like, you just made a mistake, Jon Snow. You know, like, pretty much. And that's the end of the chapter. Like, that's the fade out. So, like, in summary, Jon realized that he had more training and more advantages than some of the other kids, and he needs to stop acting like he's better than they are, you know, and kind of try to meet them halfway at accepting each other, because they're stuck together for life. I'm not sure what's up with Tyrion. They didn't really say his plan. Like, he's still just wasting time on the wall or whatever. It's kind of a weird place for him to stay, especially if he was guilty of trying to kill Bran, which I don't actually think that's the way. More on that a little later. Uncle Ben's missing, and he was after Waymar Royce, so that's nerve-inducing a little bit as far as why he hasn't come back yet and why he's late. Thorne's super mad, and Robb still loves his brother. So that's the good summary. I'm Tory Torrential, and what's happening? You'll have to excuse me. I have to keep the grumpkins out of my brain. I am conspiratory, and I have been noticing some things that aren't adding up. Right? You see, sometimes when you think about this stuff too much, some things don't connect. So you have to ask crazy questions, and you get crazy answers. So here are some crazy theories about what is actually going on. Okay, first off, I have a serious feeling that Tyrion Lannister is being framed. Why? Because he's very smart. And that seems like a very dumb move to give a one-of-a-kind, very traceable dagger. I don't buy it. Also, he doesn't seem like the type to overpay. Especially not with that kind of money. And especially not how much that dagger's actually worth. Just for, to save his brother's pride on something he doesn't even necessarily know what's going on. Because obviously he knows Tyrion, he knows Cersei and Jaime's going along, but he likes Jaime, granted, because Jaime's the only one who knows him kindness. But see, that got me thinking, like, he doesn't have a vested interest in Bran's death. The only two that do would be Jaime and Cersei, because that's who Bran got, right? And of the two, Jaime didn't even want to throw him originally. He just had to do yet another horrible thing for Cersei. That's why he did the show of doing it and asking, and the things I do for love. He said full of self-loathing. I'm sorry, it said loathing, but it's self-loathing, because he has to be a monster yet again for Cersei Lannister, because he was just trying to hook up with her and she was plotting the entire time. Now, we also get that as soon as Tyrion starts talking about his plans and leaving and whatnot, Cersei gets up and leaves the room, right? And she constantly looks at him with disdain. So I don't think she likes the imp. So I think that she used Tyrion's dagger, knowing that he wouldn't be with them to defend himself, and then paid the assassin to take out Bran. It's Cersei. I did the math. Also, let's talk about some wolves for a second. Oh my goodness, right? Now there's a few little threads here, couple. Okay, my theory is that the wolves are actually a boon that were given to the Starks by the old gods. Okay, go with me, right? The old gods are the strongest in the north. Obviously, from chapter 1, there's already bad stuff coming from the north, right? But from Bran's dream, we know it's the heart of winter, and that winter is coming, and this stuff is bad, right? And the three-eyed raven is trying to help Bran ascend. But what happens during that dream? Because the entire dream is Bran observing things except for one moment, and that moment is the god tree in Winterfell that looks back up, and it says, and I quote, gives him a knowing look, right? So what could the old god possibly know, right? Because he was a god. He doesn't know about ascension, right? So he would have to either know that Bran was going to ascend, or, and here's my theory, he knew that once they moved the wolf in with Bran would start coming back. Because if you remember, the more they closed Bran off from the wolf, the weaker Bran got, right? And then they move him into the room after he saves Catelyn, and all of a sudden, Bran's waking up like 2 days later. Also, not only did all the wolves instantly imprint on the kids, which would be normal, the kids imprinted on the wolves. Okay, because Robb can tell each howl individually of each wolf that was in Winterfell. Like, he knew Shaggy Dog's wolf, like, howl. He knew Bran's howl, and he knew Grey Wind's howl. Now, I would give him Bran, and I would give him his own wolf, but how did he know it was specifically Shaggy Dog? Right? Like, in the right order? You know what I mean? Like, and they've only had him for like 2.5 months. And every time, like, these wolves are so reactive, and they show up as soon as one of the kids fear danger and stuff, and they mimic their behavior. They're super smart. They're super in tune. They read them. Like, they either have to be the smartest wolves ever, or they have to be semi-magical, which I'm believing is semi-magical just because of Bran healing, and the old gods. I think the fact that there was exactly enough for Ned Stark's kids is not a coincidence. And I think that was sent as important, because where did they come from? The same place as the old gods. They came from the north, right? Meaning, where the old gods are strongest, they sent those wolves down to Ned Stark. Why would they send them to Ned Stark and not like the Black Watch or whatever? Because, I mean, honestly, like, it would have had to gone through like Castle Black, basically. Like, if it was just wandering, what wild wolf's just going to be able to traverse an entire stronghold full of guys on watch from things coming from the north? You know what I mean? Like, it had to have help, as far as I'm concerned. Unless it has a secret wolf tunnel under the wall or something, which should be impossible. And on top of that, It mysteriously appears. There's the exact right number, all of them super bond psychically, and so, and that old God giving Bran that knowing look, like he knew it was going to play out like that, but why Ned Stark? Because Ned Stark spends all his darkest moments in front of that God tree at the pool, meaning, yes, there is help at the wall, with the night watch, but the most honorable man that's closest to the wall is easily Ned Stark. And all of his reflection and rumination and taking things serious and being a man of honor and like trying to hone who he was as a man happened directly in front of the God tree. So the God tree would know that Ned Stark was a good man. And I think that was kind of their way of trying to either bolster the Starks or get the Starks to start, like helping. I don't know what the end game is, but I have a feeling, right, that those old gods and the wolves were sent to the Starks on purpose. Now, this one is crazy, all right, but there was 8 or 9 different things that weren't adding up at all. Like Ned Stark talking to King Bobby and him having a different version of the story, like with Willa. And then, Catelyn asking about Ashana Dane and stuff, and Jon Snow. I don't think that Jon is Ned's, because the men don't know. Like, nobody knows. Are you kidding me? Like, how does Ned get away from literally everybody and go make a bastard and hear about the bastard and, like, confirm it and stuff without anyone ever seeing her? Because Robert is his best friend and has no idea what she even looks like, and that's telling me that she doesn't exist, right? And I was kind of like, that sounds really crazy, because everybody says he looks like Ned. Like, he doesn't look northern, he looks like Ned. But then I was also thinking, I was like, well, he does look like Arya, but there's that passage saying that Arya looks like Lyanna, right? And then I started thinking, if Lyanna had a kid, it would look like Ned, right? Right? Go with me here. So, like, we're thinking, like, okay, if it is Lyanna or whatever, like, who could have had a kid with Lyanna? And I instantly, I was like, oh, but it maybe is Bobby's kid. But why? Well, one, I'm pretty sure Bobby would know. You know what I mean? Like if he knocked her up, because he was super in love with her and stuff. And then it dawned on me that there was one other person, because Bobby dreams about killing him almost every single night. And he's a Targaryen, meaning if Rhaegar knocked up Lyanna, right? Because Bobby, it's really weird, that conversation is stuck in my head a little bit, because if you watch Ned, he's super in love with Lyanna, he's super reactive to everything he says, except when Bobby says, how many times do you think that he R-worded Lyanna, against her will, the monster, and then he changes tact. He doesn't show any anger, and he doesn't say anything. And then Robert's like, I kill him in my mind almost every night. And that's when Ned speaks again, and he's like, it's done, man. You avenged, you fulfilled your word. Like, the way he says it, is kind of weird, because he doesn't say, like, you avenged my sister. He says, you carry it out, like, it's done. You almost like put it down. And then I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, why the hell, if Liana had a baby, why the hell wouldn't he tell Bobby, you know, like his best friend? And then you remember when they started killing off the Targaryen kids, Ned left the castle. He was so angry he left the castle. And then when Bobby was talking about, I'm going to kill all the Targaryens, Ned got super upset again, right? And then that led me to thinking, like, he was dead set on Jon not going to King's Landing. Like, he was fighting with Catelyn. And, like, who cares about having the bastards and stuff? Like, Catelyn was kind of right. Like, nobody give a crap, you know? And stuff. And Ned's like, can't be done, man. It'll be terrible. He'll get whatever. It'll be an affront and all that. and you know, he just kept trying angles. He's like, he's best friends with Rob, you know, like you got to keep him. And Catelyn hates Jon. Like, she just fuck Jon, get him out of here, you know. And then he finally relents, like, okay, well, maybe he'll join the Night's Watch now. Ned knows what the Night's Watch is. Why would he stick up for Jon and refuse to send him away and take care of him all that time just to let him go to the Watch? And that's so he wouldn't have to go to King's Landing, because he doesn't want Jon to be near King Bobby. And I can confirm that, because at the meal, he has eaten almost every single meal with, you know, the Starks and stuff, because they don't say that this has happened at any other time. And I'm sure they had other royal guests that might be like, oh, I can't be seated with a bastard or whatever, you know what I mean? And they were just like, nope, Jon's eaten, right? And then the one time King Bobby's there, all of a sudden Jon's all the way in the back on the benches, right? Now why would that be? It's because King Bobby knows what Rhaegar Targaryen looks like and what Lyanna looks like. And if he looks too close at Jon, he's going to recognize both of them. I think this is Dragon Wolf, baby. Dragon Wolf. Right? And then he's got the old God Wolf with him, right? And Cersei is definitely trying to frame the imp for the murder of Bran. Conspirator. Hey, I'm sorry. I don't... we seem to have a problem with our signal. Anyway, I'm Tory Torrential. This is Tory Survives Game of Thrones. We were on chapter 19, Jon. You were hopefully partially amused, at least a little bit, enough to keep watching. And I love you. Thanks for watching my show. Like and subscribe.